We have this idea that genius is, well, magical, like a lightning strike of brilliance that just hits a few lucky people. But is that really how innovation works? In this explainer, we're going to pull back the curtain on that whole lone genius myth and find out what really drives those world-changing breakthroughs. So let's deconstruct genius together and see what's actually going on. This right here comes from Vint Cerf, one of the key architects of the internet. And he's talking about the tech titans he's met. And his point is so important. These innovators, they aren't mythical gods. They're just people. And that idea, that simple thought, is really the key that unlocks this whole story. All right, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to tackle the myth head on. Then, we'll break down the 4 key ingredients that you see again and again in the stories of real innovators. A deep-seated curiosity, the guidance of mentors, a hands-on approach to learning, and finally, the power of other people. When you hear the word genius, what do you picture? Probably someone born with a crazy high IQ, right? Someone who just gets it, solving problems the rest of us can't even wrap our heads around. It's a really intimidating image, and it puts innovation on this pedestal where it feels totally out of reach. This is the big question we're diving into. We're going to explore the idea that genius isn't some kind of fixed trait you're born with. What if it's actually the result of a specific mix of mindset, your environment, and your experiences? Something way more accessible than the myth wants us to believe. So that brings us to our very first ingredient, curiosity. Long before these pioneers were inventing revolutionary tech, a lot of them were just kids who had this burning desire to understand how stuff worked. And usually, that meant taking it apart. I love the story from James Lackey. It just shows it perfectly. It wasn't some neat, scientific experiment. It was messy. He broke the clock. But that act of just taking it apart, even though he couldn't fix it, that was the real education. It was all about scratching that itch of curiosity. And it doesn't stop there. Here's a Nobel Prize winner, Doug Osheroff. He wasn't in some fancy lab. He was an 11-year-old kid messing around with gunpowder because it was fun. He even said himself, it was not science really, it was just fun play. This kind of fearless, playful experimentation, it's a theme that pops up all the time. So you see the pattern here, right? For so many of these people, the journey didn't start with complicated formulas. It started with a simple, powerful drive to just understand, taking stuff apart, messing with things, getting their hands on new tech. All of it fueled by a sense of play, not some formal assignment. Okay, but let's be real. Raw curiosity is the spark. But a spark can fizzle out. It needs to be aimed, to be channeled. And that's exactly where our next piece of the puzzle comes in, the thing that turns all that playful energy into something really powerful. The role of mentors is just absolutely critical, but maybe not in the way you're thinking. In these stories, mentors aren't these all-knowing gurus who just hand down wisdom from on high. Nope, they're guides, people who give you a little encouragement and, maybe most importantly, a clear place to start. This is such a great story from Bob Metcalfe, the guy who co-invented Ethernet. In 8th grade, he built a simple adding machine for his teacher, Mr. Gossier. And look at that grade, an A triple plus H superior. I mean, he remembered that exact grade decades later. That one little piece of over-the-top encouragement had a huge, lasting impact. And this really gets to the heart of what a great mentor actually does. Metcalfe said Mr. Gossier gave him projects he knew he could handle, starting small and then building up to a computer. A mentor's job isn't to give you the answers. It's to break down a giant, scary challenge into smaller, solvable steps. They show you exactly where to begin. And that leads us right into our next big idea. You've got the curiosity, you've got a guide pointing you in the right direction. Well, now you've got to actually get your hands dirty and build the thing. Because real, deep learning, it doesn't come from watching, it comes from doing. Look at this. It's like 2 totally different worlds, right? On the left, you've got the old, passive way, memorizing facts, filling in blanks, being afraid to mess up. But on the right, that's the active model that actually creates innovators, doing lab work, exploring ideas, and taking the clock apart. This is the mindset shift that really matters. Here's James Leckie again, and this is just the ultimate example. He didn't sign up for an auto repair class. He bought a broken car for $25, borrowed some tools, and just started ripping the engine out. He learned by diving headfirst into a real-world problem without knowing anything about it. Now that's an education. And that's the lesson he learned from that old car. Skills aren't some mystical gift. They're something you acquire through action.
If you have the right tools and the right information, even if it's just a borrowed repair manual, you can figure things out. It's such an empowering idea.
All right, this brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, the one that ties it all together: collaboration. That image of the lone genius toiling away in a dark lab, it's just a myth. The truth is, real breakthroughs almost always happen because of human interaction, debate, and teamwork. This quote from the incredible physicist Mildred Dresselhaus just nails it. Science isn't some sterile thing that happens in a vacuum. It's deeply human. It's social. It involves relationships, arguments, and working together. It's done by people, with people. And here's the perfect proof of that in action. Bob Kahn had the first idea for the internet's core protocols. But what did he do? He brought in Vint Cerf to work on it with him. And the final product, in Kahn's own words, was much better than what he started with. See? Innovation is a team sport. So let's just throw out that old myth and build a new model, right here, right now. Forget the lightning strike. Real, world-changing innovation is built step by step. It all starts with that kid-like curiosity. Then it gets shaped by mentors who make huge problems feel small. It becomes real when you get your hands dirty, and it gets polished into something amazing when you work with others.
So in the end, it really feels like we've been asking the wrong question this whole time. Genius isn't some label you get. It's a process. It's something you do, something you build. So maybe the best way to wrap this up is to ask you to think, not about what you are, but about what you could do. What are you curious enough to explore, to take apart, and to build?